It's 10 o'clock at night, dinner's long done, you weren't even hungry 20 minutes ago. And now you're standing in front of the fridge with the door open, not really looking for anything specific, just looking. Something sweet would be nice, or maybe salty, or crunchy. You're not sure, you just know that quiet, nagging pull is there again the same way it's been there most nights this month. If you've ever caught yourself doing exactly that, I want you to hear this clearly. It's not because you lack discipline, and it's not some personal failing that showed up out of nowhere. Something changes for a lot of people after 50, and it has much more to do with biology, routine, and a few overlooked daily habits than it does with willpower. I'm Dr. Robert Vance, and in this video, I want to walk you through why those nighttime cravings tend to get stronger as we get older, why belly fat in particular seems to creep up even when your eating hasn't changed much, and a simple bedtime drink that some people find genuinely useful as part of a broader routine to help manage those cravings. I'll also be honest with you about what this drink can realistically do and what it can't, because you deserve a straight answer instead of a promise that sounds too good to check out. Let's start with the part nobody really explains well. Why does the craving show up specifically at night, even after a perfectly normal dinner? Here's a simple way to picture it. Think of your appetite like a volume knob rather than an on-off switch. During a calm, well-rested, low-stress day, that knob usually sits at a reasonable level. You eat when you're hungry, you feel done when you're satisfied, and food doesn't take up much space in your head. But several ordinary things can quietly turn that volume up as the hours go by. A night of poor sleep, a stressful afternoon, a day where meals were spaced out unevenly. By the time evening rolls around, that volume knob can be turned up much higher than it was that morning. And by 9 or 10 p.m., it can feel almost impossible to ignore. This is one of the biggest disconnects people never quite make. They blame the 9 p.m. version of themselves for reaching for a snack, without realizing the real story actually started much earlier that day, with how they slept the night before, how stressed they were, and what their meals looked like. Let me give you a picture of this, and I want to be upfront that this is a fictionalized, illustrative example, not a real patient of mine, but it's a pattern that shows up again and again in slightly different forms. Picture someone like Linda. She's 58. She eats a reasonable dinner, nothing unusual, and genuinely feels satisfied when she gets up from the table. But by 9:30, she's back in the kitchen, scanning the pantry shelves. She's not desperately hungry, she just feels this pull she didn't used to feel as strongly 10 years ago. She tells herself she'll have just one small thing, and often the craving turns out to be stronger than she expected. There's nothing wrong with Linda. What's more likely going on is that a handful of ordinary factors are quietly stacking on top of each other. Maybe she didn't sleep especially well the night before. Maybe her dinner didn't have quite enough fiber or protein to keep her satisfied for long. Maybe the day carried more stress than she consciously registered. By evening, all of that adds up to a stronger craving that has very little to do with actual hunger. Now, here's the part that's specific to being over 50, and understanding it can genuinely take a lot of the self-blame out of the picture. As we age, a few things shift gradually in the background. Muscle mass tends to decline somewhat with age unless it's actively maintained, and muscle plays a real role in how your body manages energy throughout the day. Sleep often becomes lighter and more easily interrupted, which, as we'll get to, has a very direct relationship with next-day cravings. For many women, the hormonal shifts around menopause can influence both where the body tends to store fat, often more around the abdomen, and how hunger signals behave. For men, the slow decline in certain hormones over the decades can influence energy levels, muscle maintenance, and appetite regulation in a similar way. None of this means your body has turned against you. It means the conditions your body is operating under have changed, and some of the automatic strategies that used to work without much thought may need a bit more intentional support now. That's not a decline in who you are. It's just useful information you can actually act on. Let's talk about sleep specifically, because if I had to point to the single most underappreciated factor behind nighttime cravings, this would be it. After a night of poor or broken sleep, most people don't wake up craving a plate of vegetables. Instead, foods that are very sweet, very salty, or very calorie dense tend to look a lot more appealing than usual. This isn't a character flaw. It's a fairly well-recognized pattern. When sleep is disrupted, the internal signals that tell you I'm full and I need fuel become less reliable, and highly rewarding, processed foods can end up looking more tempting than they otherwise would. For some people, this doesn't even show up as extra eating during the day. It shows up specifically as a stronger craving late in the evening, almost as if the body is trying to make up for feeling under-rested. If your sleep has been inconsistent lately, trouble falling asleep, waking up several times through the night, or just not feeling rested even after 8 hours, that alone may be influencing your evening eating more than you'd expect. And if sleep troubles are ongoing or severe, that's genuinely worth bringing up with your doctor, since poor sleep affects far more in the body than appetite alone. Stress plays a very similar role, and I want to address this with some compassion, because stress isn't something most of us can simply decide to switch off. When stress accumulates over a day, certain foods, usually sugary, refined, or high-fat foods, tend to become more psychologically rewarding. This is an extremely common, very human response, not a personal weakness. Stress can also make it harder to stick to routines you've set for yourself, which is part of why a particularly stressful week so often lines up with more nighttime snacking, even when nothing else about your diet has changed. I'm not going to give you the unhelpful advice to just manage your stress better. What I will say is that recognizing stress as a genuine driver, rather than assuming every craving is purely about food, changes how you can respond to it. Now let's connect this to what you're actually eating during the day, because this ties everything together. If your meals are relatively low in fiber and protein, you may feel satisfied right after eating, but that fullness can fade faster than expected, leaving more room for cravings to build by nighttime. Fiber is simply the part of plant foods your body doesn't fully digest for energy. Think vegetables, beans, whole grains, and certain seeds. Because it isn't quickly broken down, it adds bulk and tends to help you feel physically full for longer. Protein does something similar, helping support a steadier feeling of fullness, while also helping stabilize blood sugar, which is just the amount of sugar circulating in your bloodstream at any given moment. When blood sugar rises quickly after a meal, often from something very refined or sugary, it also tends to fall quickly afterward, and that drop can trigger hunger signals and cravings well before your next planned meal. This is part of why a dinner built mostly around refined carbohydrates can leave you more vulnerable to cravings a couple of hours later, even if the portion felt like plenty at the time you ate it. This is exactly where a simple, thoughtfully prepared bedtime routine can come in, not as a fix on its own, but as one small tool that may help some people get through that vulnerable evening window a little more easily. If you're still with me, I want you to hold on to one central idea because everything else builds on it. The goal here isn't to find one magic ingredient. The goal is to build a small routine that makes the healthier choice the easier choice, right in that window when cravings tend to hit hardest. With that in mind, let's talk about the drink itself, a simple combination of chia seeds, a bit of cinnamon, and water. Let's start with chia seeds, because I want you to understand exactly what they do, not just what gets claimed about them online. Chia seeds are small seeds that are notably high in fiber. When mixed with liquid, they absorb it and develop a thicker gel-like texture. That absorbed liquid, combined with the added bulk, is part of why chia seeds are often associated with a feeling of fullness. The fiber and liquid together add volume in the stomach, which can contribute to satiety. Satiety simply means that comfortable feeling of being full and satisfied as opposed to hunger, which is your body's signal that it needs fuel. Chia seeds also contain a modest amount of protein and healthy fat, which can further support that sense of fullness. Research on fiber-rich foods in general suggests they can support satiety and may be a helpful part of an overall healthy eating pattern. But I want to be direct with you here. Chia seeds don't burn fat. They don't specifically target belly fat, and they're not a substitute for a genuinely balanced diet. What they may do for some people is take some of the edge off a late evening craving by adding fiber, texture, and fullness to something you're already choosing to drink. Now, cinnamon. This is simply a flavorful spice, and beyond making the drink more enjoyable, some research has cautiously explored its possible role in supporting a healthy blood sugar response. I want to be careful here, because this is an area where marketing tends to run well ahead of the actual science. Cinnamon is not a treatment for diabetes. It doesn't replace medication, and where any effect exists, it appears modest and varies quite a bit from person to person. Think of cinnamon here mostly as a flavorful, low-calorie way to make the drink more satisfying, with a possible, not guaranteed, secondary benefit, rather than as the main event. Here's how the drink is generally put together in plain terms. Mix about 1 to 2 tablespoons of chia seeds into roughly a cup of water. Add a small sprinkle of cinnamon, a quarter to half a teaspoon is plenty, and stir it well. Then comes the part that actually matters most for how this works. Let it sit for at least 10 to 15 minutes, sometimes longer, so the chia seeds have time to absorb the liquid and thicken up. If you drink it right away, before that absorption happens, you lose a lot of the fullness effect that makes this worth trying in the first place, and you also raise your chances of digestive discomfort, which brings me to something important. There's one mistake with fiber that can genuinely leave people feeling worse instead of better, and I think it deserves a direct explanation rather than a passing mention. If you're not used to eating much fiber, and you suddenly add a concentrated source like chia seeds to your evening, especially without drinking enough water throughout the day, overall, you may end up with bloating, gas, or general digestive discomfort. This isn't dangerous, but it's uncomfortable, and it's exactly the kind of thing that makes someone give up on a habit after one bad experience. The fix is simple. Start small, maybe a single teaspoon at first. Let your digestive system adjust over a week or two, and make sure your water intake throughout the day is reasonable, not just in this one drink. Fiber and fluid work as a pair. Fiber without enough fluid can actually make digestive discomfort worse rather than better. And if you have any digestive conditions, swallowing difficulties, or a history of bowel obstruction, this is exactly the kind of thing worth checking with your doctor before you try it. Now let's talk honestly about timing, since the idea of before bed is right there in the title, and I don't want you walking away thinking there's something magical about that particular hour. Your body doesn't flip into some special fat burning mode simply because you drink something before sleep. There's no switch like that. What the evening timing may actually offer is something much more practical. It gives you a built-in pause during the exact window when cravings tend to peak, and it gives you something satisfying and low calorie to reach for instead of automatically grabbing whatever's closest in the pantry. In that sense, it's less about biological timing and more about behavioral timing. Meeting the craving right when it typically shows up with something that can genuinely help take the edge off. For some people, this drink simply replaces a less nutritious late night snack, and on its own, that can matter over time. For others, it adds a bit more fiber to a day that was otherwise pretty low in it. For others still, it mostly functions as a pause, a few minutes of intentional preparation and drinking that creates space between I'm having a craving and I'm automatically eating something, which is often enough space to check in and ask what's actually going on. That question, is this hunger or is this something else, is worth sitting with for a moment, because I think it's one of the more useful distinctions you can learn to notice in yourself. Hunger tends to build gradually and can be satisfied by more or less any reasonable food. Craving tends to be more specific. You want that food, not just food in general, and often shows up regardless of when you last ate. Habit is reaching for something simply because it's what you always do at that hour, without much thought at all. Boredom eating happens when there's nothing else occupying your attention, and food fills the space. Stress eating and emotional eating happen when food is being used, understandably, to soothe a feeling rather than to satisfy actual physical hunger. None of these are moral failures. There are different signals that often get tangled together, especially at night, when the day's decision-making energy is naturally lower than it was that morning. Learning to pause and briefly ask, is this hunger or is this something else, doesn't require perfect self-discipline. It just requires a small window of awareness, and that's part of what a simple evening routine like this drink can help create, not because the chia seeds are doing anything dramatic on their own, but because the act of preparing something and waiting for it builds in exactly that window. Let's touch on movement for a moment too, because it connects here more than people expect, even though this video centers on an evening habit. For adults over 50, you don't need intense or extreme exercise to support a healthy metabolism and steadier appetite regulation. Regular walking, some light resistance training, meaning movement that involves a bit of resistance, whether from bands, light weights, or your own body weight, along with stretching and general mobility work, can all support muscle maintenance, which in turn supports how your body manages energy over the course of a day. If you have physical limitations, joint concerns, or other health conditions, the right type and amount of movement for you is worth discussing with your doctor or a physical therapist, since it genuinely varies from person to person. The point isn't to pile another demanding task onto your day, it's to recognize that regular movement and evening cravings are more connected than they might seem. Since activity influences sleep quality, stress levels, and appetite regulation, all of which we've already talked about. Let's go through a few more common mistakes because I'd rather you sidestep them than learn them the hard way. One mistake is loading the drink with sweeteners, syrups, or a heavy hand of sugar to make it taste better. If you do that, you're working against the very thing that might make this useful in the first place, since added sugar can contribute to the blood sugar swings that fuel cravings later on. If you want more flavor, a small amount of unsweetened cocoa, a splash of vanilla extract, or a touch more cinnamon are gentler options. Another mistake is expecting this one drink to make up for an otherwise unbalanced diet. If the rest of your day is heavy in processed food, light on vegetables and protein, and inconsistent in timing, one evening drink isn't going to counterbalance all of that on its own. It's a supporting piece, not the whole structure. A third mistake is treating the drink as a green light to eat a large snack or meal right after it, rather than as the evening's craving support step in itself. And a fourth is assuming every single craving is about hunger when, as we discussed, cravings often have more to do with sleep, stress, habit, or emotion than an empty stomach. And finally, expecting dramatic, fast results. This is a small, supportive habit, not a transformation in a glass. If you go in expecting your belly fat to disappear within a week, you're setting yourself up for disappointment, and worse, you might abandon something that could have genuinely helped you over a longer stretch of time. Here's what I'd actually suggest if you want to give this a try for yourself. For the next 7 nights, don't treat this as a test of willpower, and don't treat it as a weight loss challenge with the scale as your scorecard. Treat it instead as a personal experiment. You're simply gathering information about your own patterns. Notice what you're eating earlier in the day, particularly whether your meals include a reasonable amount of protein and fiber. Notice how you feel right after dinner, genuinely satisfied or already anticipating a later snack. Notice what tends to trigger your cravings on a given evening, a stressful day, a rough night of sleep, before, boredom, or something else entirely. Try the drink in the evening, prepared ahead so the chia seeds have properly thickened, and simply pay attention. Did it change how strong the craving felt? Did it take the place of something less nutritious you might otherwise have reached for? How did your digestion feel the next morning? How did you sleep? If you can, make one change at a time. If you introduce the drink and also completely overhaul your diet and start an intense new workout plan all in the same week, you won't be able to tell what's actually making a difference. Small observable changes are far more useful than a dramatic overhaul you can't sustain or accurately evaluate. Before making any real changes to your diet, especially if you have diabetes, digestive conditions, swallowing difficulties, food allergies, or you're taking medications that need careful monitoring, including blood sugar or blood pressure medications, it's worth talking with your healthcare provider first. A food-based routine like this one is simple and low risk for many people, but your individual health situation still matters, and your doctor knows your history in a way a video never can. I want to say clearly too, if you're currently taking a prescribed medication for weight, blood sugar, or metabolic health, this drink isn't a replacement for that medication, and you should never stop or adjust a prescribed treatment without talking to the doctor who prescribed it. What we've covered today is meant to sit alongside good medical care, not instead of it. As we bring this together, I want to return to that moment we started with, standing in front of the fridge at 10 o'clock, not quite hungry, pulled towards something anyway. That pull isn't a sign that you're weak or that you've lost control or that your best years for feeling good in your body are somehow behind you. It's a sign that a handful of ordinary things, sleep, stress, how your meals are put together, and the natural changes that come with getting older are quietly interacting in ways that are common, explainable, and in many cases workable. You don't need to fix everything overnight. You don't need a perfect diet, a perfect sleep schedule, and a perfect exercise routine all starting tomorrow. What you need is a bit more understanding of what's actually going on and a few small sustainable habits you can build on from here. One evening where the craving wins doesn't erase your progress. It's the pattern over weeks and months that actually matters, not any single night. Getting older doesn't mean giving up on feeling good, staying active, or having real influence over your health. It means learning your body's new patterns, the same way you've adapted to plenty of changes before this one, and responding with a little curiosity and self-compassion instead of frustration. I'm Dr. Robert Vance, and what I hope you take away from this is simple. Your body isn't working against you, even when it feels that way at 10 o'clock at night. Understanding what's actually driving those cravings is the real first step. And small, honest habits, a fiber-rich evening routine, better sleep, a bit of regular movement, and more attention to how your meals are built tend to matter far more over time than any single trick ever could. If this helped you understand your own evening cravings a little better, I'd genuinely appreciate it if you subscribe. I put out practical, honest, healthy aging content like this regularly, made specifically for people navigating their 50s, 60s, and beyond who want real answers instead of hype, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What time do your cravings usually show up? Right after dinner or later in the evening? Do you find yourself pulled more towards sweet, salty, or crunchy foods? Tell me in the comments. I read through what people share, and it genuinely shapes what I cover in future videos. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Take care of yourself, one small, honest habit at a time.